Many times in UFC, when a fight goes the distance into the 5th round, it is expected that the outcome would be determined by points or decision. But on some rare occasions, we've seen fighters display their magic wand right at the death of the fight to earn themselves last-second wins to the excitement of the fans. From Yair Rodriguez's Hail Mary buzzer beater to Leon Edwards' last-second heavy shots and Yuri Prohaska's remarkable fight back against Glover Teixeira, we present you the top 10 last-minute knockouts in UFC. Number 10. Demetrious Johnson vs. Ray Borg. Having had 11 consecutive successful title defenses, former UFC flyweight champions Demetrious Johnson is regarded as one of the most dominant fighters in the history of the sport. But aside from his dominant record, Mighty Mouse was a great finisher as well. As a matter of fact, 7 out of 11 title defense fights ended before the final buzzer, but admittedly, he's had to finish some of them a few minutes or seconds to the end. One of such occasions happened in 2017 when he faced off with Ray Borg. As expected, Johnson was dominant as Borg struggled to find his footing early on. In fairness, Borg did complete a few takedowns, but there was absolutely no doubt that Mighty Mouse was in control of the fight. And it was only a matter of time before he wrapped things up. As the clock ticked on in the 5th round, Borg perfected a series of well-manipulated moves to throw his rival into the air for a suplex before quickly releasing the hold in midair and transitioning directly into an armbar. Of course, Ray Borg had no other option but to tap out of the fight, and this handed Johnson yet another successful title defense in his career. Number 9. MIESHA Tate vs. Holly Holm. During the UFC Women's Bantamweight title in 2015, many UFC fans didn't give MIESHA Tate a chance against Holly Holm. At the time, Holm looked unbeatable, and not to mention that she was also the defending champion. But MIESHA Tate pulled a surprise on her, and she did that very late in the fight as well. After dominating at least 3 of the first 4 rounds, Holm lost her grip of the fight, allowing Tate to crawl her way back into reckoning. In a bid to find some space, Holm backed up close to the fence, but she somehow overdid it. This allowed Tate to duck under a punch and take her down. The preacher's daughter still tried to remain in the game though, and with 2 minutes left on the clock, one would have thought she had what it takes to hold on to the very last second. But Tate had other ideas. As soon as she regained control of the fight, she slapped on a rear naked choke, and this time it was enough to send Holly Holm into a state of unconsciousness. Number 8. Leon Edwards vs. Peter SOBOTTA. Having transitioned from being the dark horse to becoming a true challenger and the current champion of the welterweight division, Leon Edwards is one fighter that knows how to do the business anytime, any day in the cage. But without a shadow of doubt, one of his greatest moments in UFC has to be the fight against Peter SOBOTTA. Both fighters had been going at it for a while, and the judges would have been preparing to display their scorecards. But everything changed once Leon Edwards took things personal. The defending champion landed some really loud and heavy shots on SOBOTTA, forcing the referee to bring the bout to a close in the final seconds. Number 7. KAMARU Usman vs. Colby Covington. Having had real-life bad blood against each other, the 2019 welterweight title clash between KAMARU Usman, the Nigerian Nightmare, and Colby Covington was described by many as a grudge fight. On all accounts, this fight would have been an anticlimax, especially for the fans who were expecting some fireworks to finish the fight. But thankfully, the Nigerian Nightmare was able to knock down his bitter rival late into the 5th round. Prior to the TKO finish, it would have been almost impossible to tell which fighter had the advantage on the scorecards. But Usman wasn't prepared to leave his fate in the hands of the judges as he cracked Covington with a right hand, forcing his challenger to retreat. He followed up with another right hand that knocked Covington to the floor. By the time he got back to his feet again, KAMARU Usman sent him right back with another strong hand before referee Mark Goddard decided he had seen enough for the night. At 4 minutes 10 seconds into the 5th round, it was definitely a late finish from the lethal Nigerian UFC fighter. But considering the thrilling experience that came with a knockout, it was definitely worth the wait. Number 6. JAIRZINHO Rozenstruik vs. ALISTAIR Overeem. When JAIRZINHO Rozenstruk stepped into the cage against MMA legend ALISTAIR OVEREEM, his undefeated record was on the line. For many fans and analysts, this was going to be the end of his Cinderella run, but little did they know they were in for a surprise. Initially, JAIRZINHO endured a bad spell in the fight, but as soon as he got into the rhythm, he landed a powerful shot that ultimately caught ALISTAIR off guard. Within a few seconds, the MMA legend was on the canvas with his lip split in two. This was perhaps the first warning sign from JAIRZINHO Rozenstruk. As the fight went on, he landed another shot and immediately walked away, knowing full well that his opponent had little or no chance of survival. Number 5. Yuri Prochazka vs. Glover Teixeira. The recent UFC light heavyweight title between Yuri Prochazka and Glover Teixeira is one strange fight that should teach every UFC fighter and even the fans a lesson that it ain't over until the fat lady sings. The defending champion Teixeira seemed to be in the lead for most parts of the fight, and he did everything to eliminate his challenger as early as possible. Even towards the dying embers of the fight, Teixeira pinned Prochazka to the canvas and battered his face until he began to bleed. At this point, it looked like Glover Teixeira was on his way to an easy victory, but apparently Yuri Prochazka had other ideas. Despite suffering heavy blows throughout the matchup, Prochazka performed a no-hooks rear naked choke that forced Teixeira to tap out. Number 4. Kyle Daukaus vs. Jamie Pickett. Kyle Daukaus' UFC career had been on the rise, and expectedly, he dominated and won his recent fight against Jamie Pickett, but the matchup wasn't left without some interesting last-second action. Having dominated the first round, Kyle sought to justify his Dark Knight nickname, and he did that in style, and forced Jamie Pickett to tap out 4 minutes 59 seconds into the second round. Number 3. Grant Dawson vs. Leonardo Santos. A clash between two undefeated fighters is something every UFC fan likes to see, and we're treated to a special when Grant Dawson pulled off a remarkable victory against Leonardo Santos in the very last second of the bout. With the matchup perfectly placed on a knife edge, Santos attempted a leg lock, but Grant smartly controlled his posture and responded with some heavy hammer fists to knock out his opponent, ultimately ending the fight without any help from the judges. Number 2. Yair Rodriguez vs. the Korean Zombie Chan Sung-Jung. The UFC Fight Night 139 encounter between Yair Rodriguez and Chan Sung-Jung has to go down as one of the best fights ever in MMA history. For most parts, this wild fight seemed to be hanging on a pendulum, but with a few seconds left on the clock, both fighters turned on the heat. Continuing the feisty battle, Yair produced a Hail Mary buzzer beater, a stunning upward elbow that met the cheek of the Korean Zombie, leaving him helpless on the canvas at 4 minutes 59 seconds of the 5th round. Number 1. Demetrious Johnson vs. KYOJI Horiguchi. At number 1, we've got the iconic clash between Demetrious Johnson and KYOJI Horiguchi for the UFC flyweight title in 2016. The latest finish in any UFC title fight came back in 2016 at UFC 186, as Demetrious Johnson defended his flyweight title against KYOJI Horiguchi. Remarkably, just 1 second remained in the fight when it was stopped due to submission. Johnson was the heavy favorite, and he showed that all through the fight, he basically controlled his Japanese opponent and dealt him as much damage as allowed by the rules of the sport. But Horiguchi showed great resolve to stay in the fight up until the 5th round. But just like KAMARU did to Colby Covington in our first entry, Johnson wasn't ready to leave his victory to the scorecards. He switched gears and somewhat kicked into overdrive, taking Horiguchi down to secure a mounted crucifix, followed by a number of punches and a brutal armbar. This forced KYOJI Horiguchi to submit at 4 minutes 59 seconds, which makes for one of the greatest finishes in the history of UFC.